Welcome to the Law School Toolbox Podcast. Today, we're here with Jeremy Richter to talk about life as a young lawyer. Your Law School Toolbox hosts are Allison Monahan, that's me, and normally I'm with Lee Burgess, my co-host. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so that you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the Catapult Career Conference. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating. And if you have any questions or comments, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we would love to hear from you. With that, let's get started. Welcome back. Today we're talking with Jeremy Richter, an attorney with Webster, Henry, Bradwell, Cohan, Speagle, and DeShazo. Wow. In Birmingham, Alabama. That's a lot of names. Jeremy practices.
A lot of names.
Yeah. I love how those firms do that. Jeremy practices civil defense litigation and focuses on commercial auto and trucking litigation, premises liability, general business liability, and various other aspects of insurance defense litigation. He also writes a very interesting blog, which spans a variety of topics. And you can find that at jeremywrichter.com, which we will link to in the show notes. So, Jeremy, welcome.
Thanks.
We are excited to have you here. You're going to have to explain some of what you do,
Sure.
So, before we jump into stuff, can you just give us a little bit of background about your legal career and what made you go to law school and how did you end up in these practice areas?
Okay, some of that was really happenstance. So, I graduated from college in 2003 and taught high school in Birmingham for about 6 years.
Oh, wow. What did you teach?
Mostly history, but it was a small private school, and so there was a lot of gap filling. Mm-hmm. So some photography and English, just whatever needed done. And then I was just ready to do something else. I had a really good time teaching, but I was ready for something else. And so it was either pursue a PhD in history or go to law school. And it basically came down to a coin flip, more or less.
Wow. Okay.
And so I went to law school.
Obviously, here you are.
Yeah, here we are. And when I graduated, like I guess most graduates at this point, I was toward the middle of my class. I didn't have a job. I took the bar exam without job prospects, and then after that sent out dozens and dozens of resumes and cover letters and ended up getting a job at the firm I'm with now through some folks that I had clerked with during my 3L year.
Mm-hmm. Like a job that you had during law school?
Yeah, I had worked for some solo practitioners and they weren't going to be able to take me on. They just didn't have that kind of work. And they got a call that led to this, just saying, hey, do you know anybody? And here I am 5 years later at the same place.
Right. And are you essentially would you say that you're a trial lawyer, or do you, where do you fit on that spectrum?
Yeah, so I do a big variety of insurance defense type work. That most of it is personal injury type work. Some of it isn't, but yeah, trial work, and a lot of the stuff I do is car wrecks with personal vehicles and truck accidents and defending the folks who are sued or the companies that are sued, whichever the case may be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I found some of your blog posts on the more colorful aspects of some of your clients to be pretty interesting.
Yeah, you don't get to choose your clients on this side of things, and that can be really colorful is probably a good way to put it.
Yeah, I have to imagine when you were, starting law school, you didn't necessarily think you'd be finding yourself chased off of your client's porch by their pit bull or whatever it was.
No, not at all.
So you just never know. You never know in lawyering
right.
what you're going to get into.
Yeah, I thought I was going to do criminal work. And then one summer at a district attorney's office changed that pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. And how did you go about exploring your different alternatives? Because I think, did you have, you just said that you had an idea you were going to do criminal work when you started law school, but how did you, go about figuring out if this was really what you wanted to do or not?
trial and error. So I did the district attorney's office after my 1L summer, and I knew pretty quickly that that just wasn't for me. It was really interesting, but what I saw was the same people in and out of the legal system for 40 years doing the same things at age 60 that they were doing at age 20, and that just didn't interest me.
Right.
And then my other clerkships were it was just a collection of really random things that didn't all fit together. I worked for a municipal court and worked for a real estate attorney, and then a couple of solo practitioners that shared some office space, and they had a pretty broad variety of things. And then I ended up doing something completely different from any of the things I'd clerked at.
Yeah, and I actually think that's a helpful viewpoint for people to understand, because my experience was sort of similar. I mean, I did more of the sort of the big firm path, but the area that I ended up practicing in, which was patent litigation, I had literally never taken a class in law school. I had never really worked on it in the summers. I mean, in the end, it was actually a good fit for my background. But I think sometimes people feel like they have to have it all figured out from the first day. And I think the reality is, A, you just can't know, what you're going to be into until you start trying it. And B, you got to go with the flow, particularly in today's economy, I feel like.
Oh, absolutely. It ultimately came down to, this was the one job that I was offered.
Right.
And it turns out that it was a really good fit, and I really enjoy what I do, but it wasn't like I was a student that had a ton of options and people were just clamoring for me.
Yeah, and I think that's something we try to convey to a lot of people, is particularly that first job, is you've just got to find something. And it may not be your dream position, and it may not be something you stay in for the rest of your life, but it's about getting your foot in the door, getting that experience. And not to say that, you have to settle for something you don't want, but you might kind of have to settle a little.
Yeah, you might have to do that. And then you can build up your resume and your experience and figure out what path you want to take and what's available to you.
Yeah, and you can position yourself for the next job. I mean, one of my friends who's probably the happiest being a lawyer didn't get that big firm job out of school and spent several years positioning herself through a series of other jobs, some of which were more glamorous than others, but did eventually break into that. And now, is probably one of the few people who might actually stay in a large law firm. So, I don't know. I feel like you've got to be pretty flexible as a young lawyer.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Well, you've actually got some really useful blog posts on life as a young law firm associate. So tell me a little bit about that life. I mean, for example, one thing I found interesting was how different your experience could be depending on exactly what lawyer you happen to be working for.
Yeah, so for the first 2 or 3 years, I worked almost exclusively for one lawyer who just had a huge volume of trucking defense work. And so I really got ingrained in that aspect of litigation and trying those cases and developing them. Then for the last couple of years, it's been much broader, as far as I've been working for 5 or 6 different lawyers, all of whom have different workflows and want to manage me in different ways, and just have different expectations. And so I feel like my job in those situations is just to figure out how they want briefs written. Each one wants them done differently, how they want me to interact with their clients, and just me be flexible to their needs and their wishes as far as how they want cases worked.
Right. I had a partner once tell me in a fit of anger, like, your job is to make me look good. And at the time I thought that was kind of obnoxious, but later I actually know he has a valid point. That kind of is my job.
Sure. And, I've had frank conversations with partners who are like, look, I don't care what your writing style is. I don't even care if your writing style is better than mine. This is the way I want it to sound.
Right. I definitely had that too, where you're like, okay, we can do it your way.
Sure.
But the reality is, these are the people paying your bills. So you basically need to do what they want.
That's right. You adjust.
And I think it's a fine line. I mean, I think there have to be times where you push back, but I think learning how to walk that line is probably, I would say, one of the hardest things that a new lawyer has to do.
I agree. And I guess I've been really fortunate that once I got my feet under me, I've worked with a lot of people who are really collaborative and who are interested in other ideas or even ideas that oppose their own. And so that's been really helpful for me in being able to express my thoughts and develop arguments and work through things rather than just having to be a drone or, receive instruction all the time.
Yeah, and I think you totally nailed it with this idea of like, are you just a person who has to be told what to do all the time? Because that's not what anyone's looking for. But at the same time, how to balance your perspective and your style and your thoughts with what someone who has a very specific idea of how they want to work is looking for, I think could be a difficult balance. I mean, do you have any tips on how people can kind of pick up on that? Like how to figure out what your boss is actually looking for when they may not sit down and tell you, like, this is how I want it done?
No, that can be really tough. Some of it is looking at their past work product. If we're talking about writing, you just go look at what they've done in the past, or as far as managing cases, it's just one of those things for me that I had to learn as I went along who wanted what. And sometimes that was by either overreaching or not being proactive enough and having to get some feedback from them saying, hey, that's not, what I want.
Right. This is not what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
You're not meeting expectations.
That's right. And so it's just takes time and experience and working together to figure out a balance.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's that experience. I remember one time I was at trial and the partner was like, how they do the sort of like hiss yelling or like whisper yelling at you in the courtroom because I apparently like hadn't made the exact right number of copies of some exhibit or something. And I was kind of, on the one hand, you're like, well, someone could have told me that, this isn't totally my fault. And like, where's the paralegal here? But at the same time, I was like, well, I guess it kind of is my fault to know that like he wants 7 copies of this, not 6 like everyone else. So I think, you can't beat yourself up about it, but those are definitely memorable experiences.
Yeah. I think some of it comes down to like just being teachable. And the other is like in a situation like that, only have to be told once.
Right. And I owned it. I was just like, hey, I'm sorry. I should have known this. And I think that's probably, even if it's not your fault, I think that's probably your best strategy at that point.
I totally agree.
I could have had the argument, well, so it's just like, no, I'll take responsibility. We'll move on. This won't happen again. Don't yell at me in court. It's definitely good in front of the jury.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about being in trial or like, in court, not necessarily even trial, because this is something I think a lot of people aspire to do, but is becoming less and less common. I clerked for a trial judge, so I got to kind of see that. But what's that like?
So in Alabama, the state bar has recently released a study that of all the cases that even get filed, greater than 99% are settling before they ever get to a jury.
Right.
So it's becoming more and more difficult to get that courtroom experience. But if you want civil courtroom experience, some of the fastest way to get it is either go to a personal injury plaintiff's firm that tries cases, or go to an insurance defense firm where they have a large volume of cases and they don't have any choice but to get you experience.
Right.
So,
or I guess you could go, a friend of my law school roommate became a public defender in New Orleans. And she's like, yeah, I walked in the first day and they handed me about 50 files and said, you have a hearing in 20 minutes.
Yeah, that's actually, yes, that's a great point, is that the criminal side is the other way to do it, is that you go work for a prosecutor or public defender's office and you're going to get thrown into the fire and you're going to know really quickly if that's what you want to do or not.
Yeah, exactly. Probably you should try it out in school before you do it
right.
Long term.
So my second day here, I got handed a file and said, there's a hearing at 9. Do not let the judge set this for trial.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah, once I left the clerkship, I did one trial in 2.5 years. And actually the firm I worked for got kind of hauled in at the last minute, like a month before trial or something, when it was going kind of downhill fast and the clients were concerned. So, we kind of literally parachuted in, but they definitely didn't let me speak at all. No one within 2 or 3 levels of me was speaking in court, literally,
Sure.
So I think that's right. If this is really the path that you want, probably outside of like a large firm is going to be a lot more practical place to get that experience.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's actually talk a little bit about kind of this business of law stuff too, because what do you think I think part of it's just understanding how the business works. I mean, law is a business, and how the different aspects of the business work. Like I imagine this is a sort of smaller firm that you're at.
Yeah, so we have 3 offices in Alabama. We've got a total of right around 20 lawyers. I think we're at just under 20.
Okay.
So I would say here we're a medium-sized firm.
Mm-hmm.
But the business is difficult. It's evolving. And in my experience with the business part is probably different from somebody who doesn't have corporate clients, because mine is a mix on the insurance defense side of the corporate client is hiring you, but your actual person you're representing isn't the insurance company. In most instances, it's their insured.
Okay, so, I was curious about that. So you have kind of the insurer is basically like a repeat client. I mean, client,
that's right.
Loosely termed. I don't know if they're legally your client, but so they're kind of a return.
Really messy.
Yeah, they're kind of a return visitor. Let's call them. But then your actual client is, the perhaps like meth-addled truck driver who may have shouldn't have been driving.
Yes, that's about right. So by and large, that's how it goes. So the business side of that, and this is probably true of most corporate clients, is they are becoming increasingly cost conscious. They are using, where they are a multi-state business, they're using metrics and spreadsheets and calculations to determine, what are our lawyers doing? Are they working efficiently? How are they measuring up to other lawyers in other locations? Or if they have multiple firms they use within the state, they can have a pretty good grasp on what you're doing, whether you're doing it well, whether you are keeping the client informed of what's going on, and just reporting and communicating and handling their cases and their other matters in a stewardly way.
Right. I found that really interesting when you were talking about performance metrics. I mean, that's something that I've kind of was a little familiar with the existence of, and I have other friends in other contexts who've talked to me about it. But I mean, they're not, it's not just that they're looking, well, how much money are you spending? I mean, it sounds like you're saying they may be even going back to your actual client who is their insured and saying, well, are you happy? Do you feel like you're being taken care of? Are you getting updates? That's kind of interesting.
Yeah. So, with a lot of insurance defense clients, you have time periods that you have to do reporting that's either triggered by a set number of days or it's triggered by events. Mm-hmm. So, are you doing that reporting to the insurance company? Are you evaluating the risk in a way that is actually helpful for them so that they can do their risk management on their end? And are you taking extra depositions or doing billable tasks that aren't necessary and are just running up costs? And so, they keep a pretty good watch on those things. And if you're a firm that does that, you may not get to do that for them for very long.
Right. No, that was another interesting post where you're talking about, was the efficient lawyer going to starve? And that was one of the things that I was coming from a programming background. When I went to law school, I'd been a programmer for a couple of years, 3 years. And I remember getting my first summer job, and they walked in at one point on like a Friday afternoon or Thursday or whatever it was of my first week and dropped this box of documents, physical documents, and hand me a highlighter. And they were like, oh, you need to go through these and look for these words and make a spreadsheet. And I just remember looking at this guy who was giving me this assignment. I'm like, have you ever thought about OCR and scanning these? Like, we could do this in I'm like, I could write a program that would do this in 20 minutes. And they're like, oh, you don't understand what's going on here, do you? And it's just this kind of moment of like, oh, really? I'm supposed to want to spend all of this time on this? I mean, come on.
And you know what? I think that when we started, you could probably do that. Or
right. I mean, there's no way now that they would not be. That's right. It's like, I was right. Basically, they should be doing this. And eventually they had to be doing it.
Clients know that. And a lot of clients, I think, are even doing that before engaging lawyers to help keep those costs in-house.
No, I have some friends who do e-discovery platforms and things like that. And, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. It's like the idea that you'd be paying, an associate hundreds of dollars an hour as a client to sit with a highlighter is like, come on. There are bound to be other things we could do. But yeah, I think that fundamental tension though about, this model of the billable hour, which worked sort of, when it was like, I think, and you talked about this too in your post, when you talk about there being trust on both sides, like, I trust that my lawyer is doing what they need to be doing and nothing else. It worked. But now it's kind of like, I don't really know what they're doing.
Yeah. And it's difficult. It creates a difficulty in the relationship. And if either side has broken that trust, if the lawyers are doing unnecessary tasks, or if the client, and I think this is pretty prevalent with insurance clients, whether it's a person on the billing side on their end, or whether it's a computer program, cut costs or cut bills, and some of it is for good reasons, and for some of it is just seems arbitrary. When there's difficulty in that trust relationship, the billable hour kind of breaks down and becomes less effective.
I think that's right. I mean, to be honest, like I will not hire a lawyer on a billable hour. Like anytime we need, but we're, our stuff is like, it's to file a trademark or whatever. And sometimes people still want to bill by the hour for that. I'm like, I'm not going to pay you by the hour. Like, this is what you do. You just tell me what it costs. And then I tell you if that seems reasonable or not. And we go there. But like, I'm not paying you by the hour to file a basic trademark. Like, come on, you should know what this costs you.
Sure. And even with smaller litigation lately, I've seen a movement toward flat rates like you're talking about there, where like, look, if you have a volume business, even for example, personal auto, if you have a volume business, we can set a flat rate, and some cases you're going to settle early on. Some cases you're going to try and you're not going to make as much money on it, but over the course of time, they're going to average out and it's going to work out for everybody. Yeah.
And I think more and more, I mean, clients want to be moving that direction of just for certainty. Obviously, there still will be cases or situations where that's not practical. I mean, I did patent litigation. If we were at trial, they were spending $1 million a month. It was like, we're not really, but even then actually, I mean, sometimes they were talking about flat fees, which is these very esoteric, like very elaborate schemes of like how we were going to assign. I mean, essentially it's all about assigning the risk. So talk to me a little bit about actually tracking your time, because I think that's something law students are pretty mystified about when they start working. So, how do you actually do this?
Okay, so I didn't realize when I went to law school that I was basically just going to be an hourly wage earner for the rest of my life, but that is essentially what it is. And so there's different ways to track your time. We do it in 6-minute increments, which breaks it down into tenths of an hour. And every
I'm having flashbacks.
Oh, it's terrible. Every
awful.
task you do has to be broken down into tenths of an hour increments. And so, if you exchange emails with opposing counsel, then that's, 0.2 or whatever. It's just every minute of your life is broken down into these increments, and then it starts seeping into other aspects of your life, like church or going to the movies or whatever. And you start to think, okay, that's 2.4 hours of my day.
Right. That just cost, $500 to watch this movie.
That's right. Because you could have been doing something else. But no, it's really interesting. I actually am really nerdy about this sort of thing. And I have a system that I use. I have a yellow notebook that I write all my time down in, and I have stacks of them from going back to the very first day of practice.
Wow.
And then I have a white notebook that's my to-do list, and it keeps me organized and knowing what I'm doing and what I need to be doing.
Right. Yeah, I have to admit, apparently there's like a personality type that cannot be bothered to track time, and I am definitely in that category. And I think this is, I'm listening to you talk about this yellow notebook and thinking, wow, that sounds so aspirational. Like that would be amazing if I could do that. I was that person who, at the end of the week was trying to recollect what they had done on Monday afternoon, which is a nightmare. I find that horrifying. It is an absolute nightmare. Like, do not do that. If you're listening to this, do not be that person. I know some of you will anyway. You'll probably end up quitting your law firm jobs because it drives you literally crazy. I just couldn't do it. I could not do that mindset of like, what am I doing every 6 minutes? Like, it just literally drove me crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's within arm's reach, every minute of the day at work. And when I get up in the morning and work before the toddler wakes up, it's right beside me then too. And so it's just, it takes over.
Yeah, it's a mindset. I mean, I started to feel like the firm literally owned my life, not just the time I was working, but like my entire life.
Yes.
And I think you have to find a way to manage that so that it doesn't completely invade the rest of your life. Do you have any techniques about that?
I don't. This is terribly unhelpful, but I am not capable of turning it off entirely. Most nights when I am going to sleep, it is thinking about the doctor's deposition that's at 4:00 tomorrow and whatever else is going on. But I do feel like even with that, even with just not being able to turn it off, you can still have a healthy balance of the time that you spend with family or with friends or whatever and accomplish the things you need to at work.
Yeah, I think you have to make deliberate choices. And when you're not deliberate about it is when it can really start to seep over into just no balance at all. And it's all work all the time. And that can lead to some unpleasant consequences.
Definitely.
Yeah. All right, let's switch gears because we're a little short on time, and I do want to talk to you about some other stuff. On that depressing note, so talk to me a little bit about blogging as a lawyer, because this is a big topic. People are always wondering, should they do it? Is it useful? Why did you decide to start your blog, and how's it working out?
Okay, so I started my blog last year in June of 2016. I'd been practicing going on 4 years at that point, and in kind of the insurance defense world, years 5 and 6 is kind of when people either are on track to make partner or aren't. Mm-hmm. I don't have a really big personality where I'm just going to walk into a room and people are going to gravitate toward me and I'm just going to make a huge impression. So I knew that going forward, in order to establish new relationships with clients, I needed to create a different kind of platform.
Interesting.
And I've always enjoyed writing. I identify myself as a writer, and it's something that I wanted to do, and this was an outlet to do that. And so I just kind of did it on a whim. I started the blog, and since then I've been writing a post or two, or sometimes 3 every week, just kind of depending on what's going on. Mm-hmm. And part of that was to keep up with what's going on around me, as far as, appellate decisions and things that affect my practice area, things that happen to me during working up cases or trying cases or taking depositions, and just communicating law practice management things with other lawyers that can help them along the way. And it also gives me a platform where I can talk to potential clients. It's led to opportunities that didn't directly lead to more business necessarily, but it just continued to help me create a platform for myself where I can either have more experience or more confidence or, just establish a way that people can find me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think this flows into another thing I wanted to talk to you about, which was you have a post on networking as an introvert, which I think is an issue for a lot of law students and young lawyers. Sure. Lawyers tend to be disproportionately introverted, but then there's still this idea that everybody's supposed to be going to cocktail parties and like picking up clients. I mean, I don't even know. So
yeah, that's horrifying to me.
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of fake it, although I'm sort of in the midpoint of the introvert-extrovert spectrum, so I can come off as more extroverted. But what advice do you have for people who are really struggling with this? I mean, I think your idea of starting a blog as a lawyer is great. I mean, can the law student do that?
I know that there are law students who have done it. I think as a law student, I would probably be disinclined because you just don't know what you don't know.
Right. You have to be a little careful.
Yeah, there may be things that you're perfectly competent and able to blog about that would help. And even as a young associate, I don't think in the first 3 years that I would have been particularly comfortable with it.
Right. So you think you have to sort of have some expertise before you have anything to say.
Definitely. Because it takes a long time and it takes a lot of extra time aside from what you can even bill to establish that knowledge base of your either one practice area or multiple practice areas to know what you're talking about and be able to add something to a conversation.
Right. I think that's right. I mean, now on the internet, there's this idea like, oh, everyone's an expert. It's like, well, it's not really.
That's right.
Like you and I might be experts in, having gone to law school or being lawyers of a certain type. But yeah, I mean, if you ask me to start a blog about insurance defense, I'm like, I was a patent litigator. Like, I'm not even current on that anymore. There's no way I would be able to do this.
Yeah. And so that's something I'm always careful to do is not step outside of and start talking about things that I don't know what I'm talking about.
Right.
I'm not interested in doing that. People aren't interested in hearing that. You just got to stay within the scope of what you know. But as far as advice for people who have introverted personalities, sometimes you just have to turn it on. And that's for me, what I've found is if I go to a conference or if I have a social event, I can turn it on for a while. Mm-hmm. But afterwards, I need to be alone. I need to recharge.
Right.
It's very exhausting and taxing for me.
Right. And I think conferences are a good place to look to. And this is actually something a lot of schools will pay for. Because at least at a conference, everybody's there for a reason. You have things that inherently you could talk about. Oh, did you see the panel on so-and-so? What'd you think? I think that can be a lot less intimidating than just, go to a bar association event. It's like, sure. God, please, no.
And because I've always been really terrible at small talk. Mm-hmm. It's just like, I'm not interested for one because, I'm just probably not going to see you again. So, and I know that's really terrible, but I recognize that and I own it.
You got to play to your strengths.
That's right. But, I've read a lot, and this is kind of absurd that as a human, I have to read a lot about how to interact with people. But a lot of times if you just ask questions of people about themselves, they will walk away thinking, man, that was a really great conversation.
Exactly.
And all you did was just ask them about them and have them talk about themselves.
No, that's my number one tip. I'm like, if you want to be an excellent networker, basically position yourself by the food table. And then there's the inherent, like, oh, have you tried these, shrimp things? They were great. You've got your opening. Oh, what kind of work do you do? All you have to do is keep asking follow-up questions. They'll love you.
Yes. Absolutely.
But actually, I think your point about doing research on this is actually a good one, because I think sometimes people think, oh, well, I'm just an introvert. There's nothing I can do about it. But the reality is there are actually a lot of techniques that you can use to become better at interacting with people in these situations that are not necessarily comfortable. I mean, this applies to anything. I mean, if you listen to like our early podcasts, I'm sure they're terrible, which is really embarrassing because those are the ones that get the most listens. But, you get better at things the more you do them.
Sure. And the networking that you need to do as a law student in order to position yourself to get a job, it doesn't go away once you have the job. Right. Because then you're not networking for work anymore, but you're networking to be able to earn a living and have clients and position yourself within the firm so that you're important and they can't get rid of you because you have your own clients.
Right.
And so it's not just something you need for 3 years and then you're done. It's a skill that you have to obtain in order to be a successful lawyer.
Right. And I think the way, I think everyone can do that in their own way. People hear about, building business or whatever. And again, think of like you're out at the, like steakhouse smoozing or whatever. And maybe that happens sometimes, but it could also be something like your blog where you develop a reputation as an expert. People come to trust you. You can send them to that if they, when you meet them, like, oh, I have a post on that, whatever. That sort of thing can really open a lot of doors as well.
I agree. And I found that helpful because I've been able to, there have been topics on the blog that have come up in litigation where I'm representing somebody and I'll send to, the adjuster or whoever at the insurance company and say, here's something I wrote. I think it can be really helpful for your team, or here's what's going on. And it just really explains it in a way that makes sense to everybody and they understand what's going on and what to expect in the future.
Yeah, that's highly, highly valuable. All right, well, let me ask you one last question before we wrap up on this point. So you talked a little bit about hiring, and we just talked about what firms are looking for. What are the top qualities that you're looking for in a young lawyer or law student who's applying, and how can they convince you that they have these?
When I am involved in hiring, certainly I'm not a decision maker at this point, but what matters to me isn't necessarily the skills that they're coming out of law school with, because most everybody has the same skills and your experience level may vary. But what I'm really interested in is this person teachable? Can they be coached, and are they willing to own up to mistakes, or are they willing to learn from what other people are doing around them? And for me, that's one of the most important things is teachability.
And how do you assess that?
It's really difficult if it's a cold interview where, they haven't clerked before for you, or you don't know anybody that they've worked for. It's just kind of a tone of conversation for that 30 minutes that you have with them, or, if you all go to lunch afterward or there's a second interview. I don't have a really specific or a good answer for it. It's just going to be kind of how the person comes across to me. But if certainly keys that, trigger me are if they come across as arrogant, or if they're trying to teach me things during the interview, assuming that I don't know them. Maybe that's an indicator.
Let's not be sexist, but if they're mansplaining, you're like, yeah. No, I asked the question actually because I think that's something everyone's sort of looking for, is something we're looking for. And I don't have a very great answer to it either. I think from the interviewee position, try to drop those situations where maybe you learn something. I think people are reluctant to talk about a case where maybe they failed, or they had to learn something the hard way, or they got yelled at in court, or whatever it was, because there's vulnerability around that I want it to look like I'm competent and in charge, but that can actually come off as arrogant and someone I don't want to work with. So
yes,
it's a balance. You don't want to be that person who's a total mess who only talks about their disasters, but
no, too much self-deprecation is not helpful.
Yeah, it's definitely a fine line. Well, that seems to be the theme of this talk. Is there a lot of balancing going on to be a successful young attorney? Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. So I want to thank you a lot, Jeremy. If people want to learn more about you, where can they go to do that?
I think the best place to do that is my blog, which is at jeremywrichter.com. And, I've just got an introduction to myself there, and more importantly, the things that I write about that are important to me and hopefully to other lawyers who come across it and are experiencing similar things.
Yeah, I think there's some great stuff on there. Even though I literally had to stop and think about what would trucking defense litigation even be? What is he talking about?
Don't think about it too much. You don't want to do it.
No. And you're like, oh, this probably has some bad stuff. But, I think there's a lot there, if people are interested in these topics, there's a lot of substantive stuff on there. And then if you're not so interested in those topics, but you're interested in trial litigation or even just the experience of being an associate, I think there's some really fantastic material there. So we thank you for sharing it with our listeners, and definitely thank you a lot for taking the time out of your very busy day to do this non-billable podcast.
No, I appreciate the opportunity to do it with you.
All right, thanks so much. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox Podcast, please take a second to leave a review or rating on iTunes or your favorite listening app. We would really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. Typically, we release episodes on Monday morning. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lee or Allison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.